All right. Okay, fine. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. Welcome to everyone. It's good to see some new faces. Really, welcome. And we're here right at the beginning of the chapter called Holiness. Paragraph starts actually at the bottom of 53, and the bottom of the paragraph there starts with the words, "The sanctity of place is objective, a thing in its own right." And now we're on top of page 54. So just to try and summarize a little bit everything that has been said thus far in this chapter, we're speaking about holiness. At first, Rabbi Stans described holiness as should be, and that is as anything that belongs to the separate realm of this world that cannot be measured scientifically or necessarily grasped by the human mind. Anything that the realm of miracles, therefore, is a realm of holiness. The realm of saints is a realm of holiness. And that's why the word for holiness in Hebrew is the same word as the word for separation, separated. Kadosh also means separated. That's why we said at the beginning that the word for prostitute in the Torah is called kedeshah, separated. She's separated from society. But that's what holiness means. Not that in the realm, in the holy realm, it means that it's separated from this world, anything that really can't be grasped. He also said that the center of holiness in this world is a center that God chose. Holiness can only be created by God because God is the source of holiness, and only He, as the ultimate holy being, can bestow holiness on others. And if He chooses a place as a place to become holy, then that place is holy. If He chooses a human being as a human being to become holy, then it becomes holy. We can't sanctify things with our own means, by our own rights. That's why, the example we brought was Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is a place in which probably the most majestic event in Jewish history happened. We received the Torah on Mount Sinai, but no one knows what Mount Sinai is today. We didn't turn that place into a holy place, because we don't have that power. The only entity, the only being that has the power to make things holy is God. God made Jerusalem holy, and therefore it's holy. God made the Shabbat, the seventh day, holy, therefore it's holy. If God makes things holy, they become holy. If we make things holy, they don't necessarily become holy. We can't make things holy. We don't have that power. So that's that. That's why the holiness, again, is in the realm of God alone. Yes, Akiva. Right. That's true. That's the opposite of that. Right. You're right. Good. That's right. So in that realm, you have that too. Right. That there's holiness, the way God defines it, and then there's holiness or unholiness that exists diametrically opposed to that. And that's what you're referring to. Was every spot in the desert where the tabernacle was set, was that holy or not? The spot itself, no. The tabernacle is holy, so the tabernacle, at least the space that the tabernacle took was a holy space. But it didn't remain such once we moved on, because the tabernacle wasn't there anymore. So there is a concept of Shechina eina zaza mimkoma. In the Talmud it says that holiness has impact on its place, on the place that it resides. So this would be a good example. And therefore that place still has remnants of holiness. So those spots still have remnants of holiness because that's where the tabernacle rested. In more of a modern language, you would call it energy, right? Everything creates energy, and when there's holiness in a certain place, it changes the energy of the place. We believe in that. Some human beings have this holy energy, and when they enter a place, it changes the chemistry of the place. Even after they've left, you can feel that something holy was there. But it's still not the same thing. The place itself doesn't become holy. So that's the answer to your question. And one final thing, before we continue on here, one final thing that Rabbi Stans also spoke about in this chapter of holiness is that there is an epicenter of holiness in this world, where all holiness really comes from. And that is Jerusalem, or more particularly, the site of the Holy Temple. God designated that not just as a holy site, but as the epicenter of holiness in the world. Everything holy in this world first is channeled through that site. And in a way, we gave the example of a cell phone tower, right? In a way, that's the cell phone tower of holiness in this world, the holy side of the holy temple. That's why the closer you are to it, the better your reception. That's why when we pray, we face east. Here in America, in Russia, they face west. In South Africa, they face north. Remember, you face, towards Jerusalem. Why? We believe that again is a cell-phone tower of holiness in the world. That's where holiness comes from, is channeled from. And there you're actually the closest to God. It's a beautiful midrash that says that all of the prayers in the world, prayers that we say here, all the prayers in the world first go through the side of the holy temple, and then from there they go to God, transported by the angels. Every week we have a holy day, Shabbat. So God stated at the beginning of times in the Torah that there are certain days, there are certain places, and that there are certain items that are holy. So the day is the Shabbat, the holidays. Passover is coming, that's also a holiday, a holy day. The places, we said Jerusalem, and the Holy Temple more particularly. You also have other holy cities in Israel. Tiberias is a holy city, designated by God. Tzfat is a holy city. Hebron, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah are buried, is a holy city too. So you have places that were once upon a time designated as holy, but since they were designated by the eternal God as holy, that holiness is also eternal. So that's that. But God gave us the ability to make things holy. And that's what he's transitioning into right now. That's what we're going to be speaking about. To make things holy through mitzvot, through good deeds. Each time we do a good deed, we make that place, that item that we might be using for the good deed, we make it holy. Why? Because we're partnering with holiness, with the holy being of the world, with God. That's what mitzvah means. Mitzvah doesn't mean a good deed. It's very often translated as such, but that's a wrong translation. When you do a mitzvah, you're not doing a good deed. Mitzvah means partnership. It comes from the word sevet in Hebrew. Tzavta means partnership. Each time you're doing a mitzvah, you're partnering with God in bettering the world. That's why when you're partnering with world, that mitzvah is actually holy. You're making that thing holy. So when you give tzedakah, you think you're just giving a coin to tzedakah. That coin is holy all of a sudden. And your being becomes holy. Your hand becomes holy. But that's what tzavta means. And that's, in a way, that's how we can still make things holy. But again, we didn't invent this. We didn't decide that by doing this we'll become holy. God decided that for us. Right? That's a good point, because you want to direct yourself towards that cell-phone tower, or the epicenter of holiness. So you're right. I mean, when you pray in your home, you should face east. Not just in synagogue. Yeah, the new shul will be facing east also. We had to change the whole architecture because of that. But yeah, facing east. So when you pray at home, you can face east. But I'll quote for you a Hasidic master who once told one of his students, who asked him, this was a Tzemach Tzedek, who asked him, Rabbi, should I move to Israel? I feel like making aliyah, and so on. The rabbi looked at him deeply and he said, no, you shouldn't. Because your task in this world is to make your home, you make your city Israel. You don't go to Israel, you make Israel here. And I would say it's true for every home, for every household. We should make that household Jerusalem. Not just by facing east and having Israel somewhere at a distance, or Jerusalem at a distance. But we have the power of making our homes Jerusalem. Each time we do a good deed at home, we're making it Jerusalem. Each time we speak with care and with thought and with focus, then we're making it Jerusalem. I'm sure you feel it. I say this all the time, but I visit many homes and you feel it immediately. When you walk into a house of conflict, you feel it. When you walk into a house of harmony, and that's a Jerusalem-like house, you also feel it. what creates that atmosphere? Our deeds, our words, the way we comport ourselves, our behavior in that home makes your house a Jerusalem if they're all again in sync with God. So that would be my other take on that. So these are the big ideas that have been shared thus far. Let's continue on page 54.
Could I suggest that we start with
let's go to the very bottom of page 53. We'll read the beginning of this paragraph and then we'll continue on to page 54. At the bottom of page 53 in these books. So the paragraph really, I don't know what page it is in those books.
It's the 2/3.
And 72. Okay, excellent. So it begins with the sanctity of place is objective, a thing in its own right. Does anyone want to read? Here he speaks of the nature of holiness. The nature of holiness is such that it's not always seen and it's not always exposed. I would put it this way. Think about it in the context of body and soul, which was really the theme of the previous chapter. But the naked eye sees bodies. We see each other, we see our faces. We don't see the soul. We don't see that which lies beneath the body. We don't see our emotions. We don't see our feelings. We don't see other people's compositions. We don't see that. And I would say it's the same thing with holiness. You walk into a room, you see a person. You might see the physical aspect of that room, but you can't see the holiness. And the holiness is not always revealed. What you do see is perhaps not that, what you do somehow connect to is not that which you see, but it's that which you sense. You, like we spoke about, sometimes you walk into a home and you sense something. But because sense is dependent on instincts, emotions, feelings, they can fool you. So you might think that you're sensing holiness, but it's really not holiness. And you might think that you are not sensing holiness, and it is really holiness. There's something that you sense, but you don't know what it is. There's the Tanya, one of the most important philosophical books on Hasidic thought, on Jewish thought in general, says that the evil inclination, just to take it in that direction, but the evil inclination is very clever because it can appear to the person as the most observant, pious Jew in the world. It could tell you to do things that are very pious, but really it comes from the evil inclination. For example, if you have to help a fellow Jew, the evil inclination doesn't want you to do that. It's evil. So what does it tell you to do? It tells you to pray, to go and meditate. Now, that's a beautiful thing, isn't it? You're meditating. But it comes instead of helping someone else. So it comes in a very beautiful portray, but that's not what you're supposed to do. Same with holiness. It can disguise itself very well. You think that it's something strange, so you dismiss it. Or the opposite. You think that something is holy, and it's not. It just appears as holy as that meditation appears holy. And therefore, you really have to develop a very, very acute sense in order to really perceive holiness as such. Unfortunately, we don't live in a world, imagine we would live in a world where we would see only souls and not bodies. It would be a very different world. Relate to one another very differently. But we don't live in a world like that. So holiness has to fit in that game. And that's what he's saying here. I would say that, that's why the only job qualification, if you think about this, that Moses received from God as he was about to appoint his successor, he wasn't telling Moses, please pick someone that's charismatic. Please pick someone that knows 7 languages. Please pick someone that has 7 PhDs. No. The only job qualification was someone who can connect to the spirit of each and every human being. That was the only job qualification of Joshua. What does this mean? Someone is in sync with that holiness. Spirit of every human being. If you can connect in that way to the world around you, to people around you, then your connection is much different. Then it can make an impact. Then you can be holy, or you can connect to holiness and make things holy. It can be very deceptive. Look, I think that, in 2 days from today, I have a brother who's there now, so I get live feeds. But in 2 days from today, the largest Seder in the world will take place. Where? In Nepal. Not in Jerusalem, not in Brooklyn, New York, and not even in Miami, Florida. In Nepal. Some 2,500 Israeli backpackers will be there celebrating Passover. Now, it's amazing. Really amazing. The Israeli government is involved because of security that it needs and so on. Many details that are attached to it, but you think to yourself, gosh, you see, here's a classic example of backpackers searching for something, and they feel something there. There's no doubt something there in Nepal, in Thailand, in those places. There's a lot of things that one may sense, but holiness disguises itself unholiness disguises itself in garments of holiness very well. But if you dig a little deeper, there's nothing there. Dalai Lama is known of. Rabbi Steinsaltz tells the story. He said that he once met an Israeli who went up the ranks of Buddhism until he reached the Dalai Lama for his final workshop. And the Dalai Lama asked him, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm this person from Israel." He said, "Are you Jewish?" He said, "Yes." He said, "So what are you doing here?" you have everything in Judaism. You don't need me. And that's how his life was transformed. He went back to reconnect to his roots. But there, see, so we connect to things that we sense, but they're not necessarily holy. They might have garments of holiness. And conversely, sometimes holiness comes in places that are most disguised as unholy. The Talmud says, "Hizaru mibnei adiim shemehem tetzeh Torah," which means, be careful about the children of the poor, because Torah comes from them. Wisdom, Torah, holiness comes from them. Holiness is sometimes disguised in poverty. So there's things that we sense again, but they're not necessarily holy, or things that we sense as holy and they're not necessarily holy. Rabbi Steinsaltz, the author, loves to call this. I've heard him use this expression many times with people. Until recently, about a year and a half ago, I sent a dear student there to speak to Rabbi Steinsaltz, and this student was thinking of going to speak, not Nepal, but going to Bali. As he was undergoing the spiritual transformation in his life, and Rabbi Steinsaltz looked at him. He's known to be very blunt, very truthful, the author of this book, and he told him, "You remind me," what confirmed Rabbi Steinsaltz afterwards. He said, "You remind me of these women who have fake pregnancies." Apparently there's a thing like that, right? Where you think you're pregnant, but you're not. You have nothing there. It's not even a miscarriage. There's nothing. You think you're pregnant, but you're not. He said that to him. He said, "Look, you have this fake pregnancy as if God is within you. You're embodying this divinity. But it's all fake. It's a hot air balloon. And the evil inclination plays that game with us all the time. One of the ways we can know the difference between whether this is coming from the evil inclination or from the good inclination, this was told by Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory. He said that one of the ways one can know whether it's the evil inclination disguising himself as a pious person or not is whether your inclination is directed towards deed or not. Just like in the example I gave you before, deed. If it's meditation versus helping, well, you know that you have to go towards deed. If you are inclined to meditate, that means it's the evil inclination because you have a deed to choose, and deed always is an indication of something the good inclination is telling you. Yeah, that's why. This is Jewish law. If you're walking in the street and $5 fall out of your pocket and a poor person finds it, you still fulfill the mitzvah of charity, of tzedakah. Why? The deed is the deed. It doesn't matter whether your mind was there or whether you didn't even know about it, but the deed is the deed. But you're right, for the deed to be perfected, it needs the right kavanah. Sefer HaChinuch, which was a book composed in the 13th century. The author still remains anonymous, even though many people think that it was Rabbi Aaron Alevi of Barcelona, who was the student of the Rashba. This is Linda Benaderet's is a descendant of the Rashba. Rabbi Shlomo ben Adair, the chief rabbi of Barcelona in 1200. But the Sefer HaChinuch has a beautiful quote that says, I think it's true in psychology, it says, Acharei ha'ma'asim nimshachim ha'levavot, which means after actions, the heart follows. We think it's the opposite. We think, well, first the heart needs to be in it, and then we can act. No. Always do the deed, and your heart will follow. Your feelings will come. Anyhow, so that's the idea here. Let's continue. Indeed, a powerful, uplifting appeal. Right. So Yair introduces a very big idea, the very big Kabbalistic idea that makes sense, and that is that wherever there is holiness, there are always forces of holiness trying to destroy that holiness. I think that's why Jerusalem is one of the most disputed cities in the world. There's so much holiness there that it creates so much dispute, so much forces of unholiness. And there's a beautiful custom, Kabbalistic custom, which is performed. In fact, brides and grooms who get family purity training before they get married are told about this custom. There's a beautiful custom that says that after a husband and a wife have intimate relationships, they should sprinkle water around their bed. Why? Because the act of intimacy is the holiest act that one can perform. Because if he performs it, he or she, if they perform it right. Why? Because you're actually partnering with God during that act and potentially creating a child. So God has to come and be with you. And you're doing it really for the future, for God's presence in this world, through human beings, through you. So it's the holiest act. But because it's such a holy act, you have forces, like he says right here, that try and attack this act and prevent it from happening or contaminate the act after it's done. So what do? You sprinkle water around your bed. And there's actually in Aramaic, it's in the prayer books. We don't pay attention, but the bedtime Shema, there's an Aramaic phrase that you say as you sprinkle that water, where you say, evil spirits, go to these drops of water and leave my drops alone. Good? That's what you say. To, in a way, you know what? Don't leave me alone. There's so much holiness here. We want to ensure that it remains intact. But that again, it's based on this idea. Wherever there's holiness, and that's why I think whenever there's a force of positivity, there's always a force of negativity trying to fight it. We know this as human beings in the most external surface of life. And whenever we try and do good, very often there is a bad trying to attack us. Albert Einstein said it, that every great spirit is always, I don't exactly remember the words, word for word, the quote word for word, but violently opposed by mediocre spirits. Every great mind is always violently opposed by mediocre spirits. I think that's the way he said it. Anyway, he didn't say it in English, so even the exact words wouldn't help. But that's the idea. When you have greatness, there's always, we know this, right? I'm sure you know this from your personal lives. There's always mediocre spirits trying to oppose it. And the greater the holiness, the greater those forces. It's almost a never-ending battle. You know, speaking about Jewish customs that relate to this idea, I know the Ben Ish Chai, who was a halakhic authority from Baghdad of 150 years ago, he writes that, and other halakhic authorities write that, and other Jewish books write this, but they say that a man and a husband and a wife have to be particularly careful on Friday afternoons to maintain their peace in the home, to maintain the shalom bayit. Why? Because that's when these evil spirits will try and disrupt your peace as much as possible, because they know that you are united now in purpose, in preparing the Shabbat together, in welcoming the Shabbat. You're united in holiness, in preparing for this holy day. So those evil spirits don't like that. And they'll try and come disrupt that by creating disharmony in your marriage. That's why a lot of fights, I don't know about your homes, but a lot of fights between husbands and wives in Jewish homes happen on Friday afternoon. It's the doings of these evil forces. They know that there's something so holy happening there, so they don't like it. They try and destroy it. That's the way it is. That's the way God creates the world. But on the other hand, I think what he says here at the very end of this paragraph is that holiness usually trumps, it prevails after it's been challenged. And once it's overcome that challenge, then you can see holiness reigns. That's right. And then that action has to be sometimes repeated again and again. And then finally take the center stage and reign. And until then, that's right. Those evil forces will always be there. But speaking of Jerusalem as the epicenter of holiness, Jerusalem is a perfect example for this. Not just today, because it's the most disputed city in the world, as we said. By the way, there's such a thing called Jerusalem syndrome. People go to Jerusalem and become crazy. I think that's part of those forces that are there. But they think that Messiah is. There's a whole syndrome, right, about it. But the Holy Temple, the first Holy Temple that was built by King Solomon, only came after King David, his father, who wanted to build that first temple, after he launched himself into against enemies. Why? Because he was, in a way, forcing that holiness to finally reveal itself, but it was facing time and time again those evil forces. And only once he was consistent with that fight, with that holiness fight, with that holy fight, did he prevail, and then the Holy Temple was able to rest on the Temple Mount. But it came through, that's why the Midrash, it's actually the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, speaks of the day of the inauguration of that first temple. The day of the inauguration was on Simchat Torah, actually. That's when King Solomon marched with his army and many, many men and women and children to the gates of the Holy Temple to inaugurate it, of the first Holy Temple. And there, and King Solomon had everything ready, and the gate of the Holy Temple was supposed to open. He asked his men, go and open it. And they couldn't open it. And King Solomon sent more men, they still couldn't open the gate. King Solomon said, oh gosh, what am I going to do? He started praying to God, please open the gate. We prepared for so long. We built this temple for you. Open the gates. It wouldn't open. Eventually, King Solomon said, you know what? In the merit of my father, King David, open up those gates. And the gates miraculously opened up. And what is the Talmud saying? What is the story about? It's saying that it's that fight of holiness that really counts. King David sacrificed himself for this temple. Solomon only built it, but King David sacrificed himself by fighting the fight of holiness. And eventually, thanks to that, the temple was able to be built and to rest on and to dwell there. So it takes a lot of time. Sometimes it takes a lifetime, like King David's lifetime. But then once holiness wins, then it's exposed to all. I think that's what he's saying here at the very bottom of the paragraph. Again, we see that in our own lives, but let me just add to this, and that is that even then when holiness wins and it finally can rest on the center stage, even then that doesn't exist forever. It's only temporary. The first temple was also temporary. Eventually that was destroyed. And then you had a period of exile. And then you had a second temple. After that period of exile, where holiness was the war of holiness was fought. Then the second temple was also destroyed. Only the third temple will be eternal. That's why it's the third temple. Speaking of this, I don't know, Rabbi Stans doesn't go into this really here, but there's a concept called chazakah in Hebrew, which means that something only becomes established once it's done 3 times. 3 times. I think you have a lot of customs like that. Things that are just, nothing comes to mind right now, but I'm sure you can think of. Apologize. That's right, you have to apologize 3 times, and then if they don't forgive you, very good. Then you did. Why 3? Because only when something happens, it's repeated 3 times, then it's considered established. For example, there's a Jewish law about this. Not
3 strikes and you're out.
that's where it comes from. But the Jewish law actually, maybe, maybe. But three strikes and you're out speaks of this law that, that if there's an animal that attacks 3 times, then it's considered a dangerous animal. It can't be domesticated. 3 times, but you wait 3 times. So the same idea. Some people get married 5 times. Ronald Perlman from Revlon, married 5 times. One of the wealthiest Jew in the world, I think, maybe after Sheldon Adelson. Ronald Perlman, the owner of Revlon. Revlon?
Oh, yeah.
He's married 5 times. Doesn't matter. I don't know why I'm bringing this up. But 3 times. Now, the third temple will be eternal. Then the holiness will be consolidated there on Mount, on Temple Mount forever and ever. Once it's consolidated, it will remain eternal. Yeah. That's why the Torah was given on the 3rd month. The 3rd month, the month of Sivan. There's Nisan, which is the 1st month, this month now, Iyar, and then because of what it comes to represent, it represents that unity. The unity of the 2 opposite forces. That's why the minimum people you're allowed to have on a rabbinic court is 3. You have to have 3. You can't have, there's no such thing in Judaism as a 1-judge court. You have to be 3 judges. To symbolize that, again, that unity, that number 3 that comes, umachria b'nehem, we call it. And it creates a unity of forces.
18 is 3.
That's right. Minimum of 3. There's no such thing. In rare cases, there's a thing of one judge. But Beit Din is 3. That's right. So you have the number 3, which then does create permanence. But same is true for holiness. Until that number 3 happens, then the permanence cannot be there. It's a lesson for life. Because, after we fail once, it doesn't mean we should give up. Try 3 times, and then maybe think of giving up. But even then, you should try at least 7 times. King David says in Psalms, Sheva yipol tzadik v'kam, that a righteous person falls 7 times, and he gets up each and every time. V'rasha yipol be'echat, and he continues to say, but the wicked man falls after just 1 fall. Then he faltered. Winston Churchill said that success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. But that's the idea. So it's same here with holiness until holiness wins. Let's continue on here with the second paragraph on page 54. The next paragraph. The holiness of a place. Right. So there are places that God chose as holy. Those are entirely holy. There are places that man makes holy, but that holiness is not to be compared, as he writes here, with the places that God chose, because it's holiness that comes really indirectly from our actions, from the mitzvot that we do, like we said before, or from the saints that may have studied Torah there or done good deeds there. Synagogues. Places that we're building a new synagogue, that's a place that's going to become a holy place through our good deeds, through our prayers. But that synagogue is not to be confused with the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem. You still can't confuse the two. The tombs of saints and sages are also like that. In a way, the tombs of saints and sages are the dwelling place here in this world. And because they were holy, because they were saints, who were completely connected to God in every aspect of their lives, so that holiness still exists. And when we pray at graves of the saints, of the righteous, what we're doing is actually we're asking them to be that vehicle for our prayers. And we go to them because it's such a holy vehicle. It's intact. If we just pray by ourselves, to ourselves, then our prayers can be blocked by all sorts of things. By maybe these evil forces. Or maybe our prayers are not worthy enough to go all the way up to God. I'm laughing because, as I told you, Rabbi Steinsaltz is very blunt. And he once walked into a temple, a synagogue. And he turned to me and he said, I wonder how many prayers are stuck here in this room. So some prayers are carried all the way. But when you do pray by the grave of the righteous, because of that righteous person's presence there and his merits or her merits, then the prayers have a vehicle. Like he calls it a vehicle that is intact, that is completely pure, and your prayers therefore get this extra boost. But those are places again that are holy in this world indirectly. They're not directly holy; they're indirectly holy. And I'll say this, that I think that it's true for places, but it's true for human beings too. And what I mean by that is that we can become also holy. The more we do good, we spoke about deeds that are repeated. The more we do good, the more we think good, the more we speak good, the more holy we become here. Yes, there are prophets that God designated as holy people, right? Elijah the prophet and Moses and so on. So that's a different type of holiness. But you have people that make themselves holy, just like those places, through speech, through thought, through action. And the more we engage in those things, in those holy things, in those deeds, in those words, in those thoughts, the more we make our own selves, our own beings holy. And that's how those saints, many of those saints become holy. It's because they were so connected to God in every sphere of their lives that they became a part of God, so to speak. That's that. What's interesting, I noticed these things, but I know of places that were once upon a time synagogues. Some massive places, and I would love to make a study about this. And some small homes, office places. I was just in Chandler. In Chandler, the Chabad Rabbi Deitch, just built a beautiful new synagogue, and he built it right next to the place where he was at before. And I was wondering what that place became, what that synagogue became. And it fascinates me, but each time I explore these things, there's either a psychic that took over the place or some vague, some vague place that takes over places like that. There was a psychic there. And I said to myself, maybe because there's so much energy there that they don't know what to do with it. And so psychics maybe feel like this is a good place from which to launch their own holiness. But these places can't just go back to normal places. There's too much energy there. Both. Both. They know that they're holy, and they still know that there's so much more they can do. No doubt, though. But they know that they're holy, and they know that therefore what they are saying. I know of someone who once went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe or Schneerson to ask him for advice. And he went to his secretary, he said, I need advice for my business. The secretary went to the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, I'm only going to tell him something if he's going to listen to me. And he went back to say that to him, and he said, fine, I'll listen. And the secretary was troubled by that, and he went back to the Rebbe and he said, why did you say that to him? And he said, because I'm not going to bother God if I don't have to. And I think what he meant is that God is going to place the words I have to say to this person. But if that person's not going to listen to me, why bother God? So I think they know that they're holy. I think they know that what they're saying, definitely we believe that what righteous people tell you, what saints tell you, that of that caliber, what they tell you is what God really says. They might not be able to predict the future. They might spoke of that story, but they might tell you, don't go on that plane. They don't know why they told you, don't go on that plane. Maybe that plane will be hijacked, and maybe it was hijacked. They wouldn't be able to tell you that that's because I told you not to do this because I saw that the plane was going to be hijacked. It's just the words that God, they know that they're channels of God in this world, that they're holy in that sense. But they also know that they have so much more to do. Yes, but there is such a thing as saint. In Hebrew, they would be called kadoshim, kadosh. We call them holy, saint. Why? Because again, they are so connected, so wired with God that they become holy. Yeah. The Rebbe was unique in his generation, I believe. I mean, again, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I think he was unique. What? Yeah, there are 36 hidden righteous people. Look, Rabbi Stein Zaltzimai is a
Yeah.
saint.
I was gonna say, a lot of people do that.
And look, you don't have to be refined. You don't have to feel their holiness in their presence. Something's different. So you have people that exhume that, yeah. But that again is because they walk their entire lives until this very day. Increasingly, every day is a new challenge for them to refine themselves, to connect themselves to God in every area of their being, not just in action, but in deed, in thought, in comportment, every possible way. That's an excellent point. I think there's 3 levels to it. There's human condition. There's self-absorbedness, where people are completely absorbed in themselves. That's unhealthy. Then you have self-consciousness, where you're conscious of who you are, but you understand that you're not at the center. And then I would say there's divine consciousness, where it's not about you anymore. I'll never forget, Rabbi Stans once described the pathway of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson. He said that when he assumed the role of leader, to lead the Chabad movement, and I would say the Jewish world, these are the words that Rabbi Stans used. I'll never forget it, as if it was yesterday. But he said then the Rebbe made a conscious decision to cease to be. To cease to be. From that point on, he was God's agent in this world. Everything he did was for God. And that's divine consciousness. And I think that's, yes.
Maybe that's 3.
Yeah, that's right. And that the saints achieve that 24/7. You start using the tools that God gave you, of course. Yeah, from the charisma that God gave you, because he was extremely charismatic, to the wisdom but everything becomes a channel for God. It's not about you. Yeah. All right. Are we on in 2 weeks?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. A happy Passover to each and all. And thank you. All right. We'll see you.